Imagine finishing a movie, then paying $100 million just to make that movie so much worse. Sounds insane, right? Well, Warner Brothers did this not once, but twice, within the same year. Suicide Squad, when the trailer company is hired to make a feature-length movie. Now, many people know that Suicide Squad sucked, but not many know that a lot of this was down to chaotic reshoots and a story that was stitched together in the editing room. I mean, if you've ever watched the movie, you would have noticed its incoherent and confusing tone. Well, this was because it's essentially a mishmash of two very completely different movies forced together by a studio that couldn't make up its mind. David Ayer spent months making his version of the Suicide Squad, which was a dark, violent psychological thriller about damaged criminals forced to make impossible decisions. In fact, his version was more like a horror movie than a superhero film. His Joker was genuinely terrifying. The team barely got along, and some of the main characters actually died in brutal ways. But here's the problem. Test audiences hated it. They thought it was too scary and too depressing. So Warner Brothers panicked and hired a film trailer making company called Trailer Park. Yep, a movie trailer company. So we're not even talking about seasoned filmmakers. Anyway, Trailer Park was hired to completely recut the movie. They added pop songs, bright colors, and forced jokes into scenes that were never meant to be funny. And they reshot huge chunks of the movie where characters who hated each other suddenly became best friends. And dramatic scenes were refilmed as comedy scenes, which is why the movie seems to have a split personality. And the studio spent millions of dollars on reshoots and re-editing, which brought the final budget to $175 million. But despite making $749 million worldwide, the movie got a ton of backlash. Why? Well, because the trailer was so good and many people were excited to watch the movie, only to feel like they had been ripped off. In fact, the majority of people felt the trailer was far better than the movie itself. I mean, this is literally what the top comments on the trailer are saying. However, the movie's critical failure was basically down to so many reshoots and last-minute decisions that completely changed the tone. That's why iconic scenes from the trailers were missing from the actual movie. And the story couldn't decide if it wanted to be dark and serious or light and funny. Warner Brothers had turned a potentially great film into an expensive disaster. And David Ayer's original vision had been completely destroyed by corporate panic. And it's not like Warner Brothers would learn their lesson, because something similar would happen a few months later with another movie that should have been a runaway blockbuster success. Zack Snyder was deep into making Justice League when family tragedy forced him to step away from the project. So Warner Brothers brought in Joss Whedon to finish the movie. But Whedon didn't just complete Snyder's vision. Oh no, he basically made his own movie instead. Whedon reshot so much of Justice League that most of the original footage was thrown away. He changed the tone from dark and serious to light and jokey. He completely rewrote character arcs and added new scenes while cutting others. And with all that reshaping of the film, the most viral and memorable change he made was to Superman's upper lip. Henry Cavill was already filming Mission Impossible and contractually could not shave the mustache, so Warner Brothers had to digitally remove it in reshoots. I mean, the CGI team were able to render an entire alien invasion frame by frame, but a mustache? Nah. Nope. Too hard. Superman's buffering upper lip ironically became one of the most iconic moments of the film. And the actors looked confused in interviews because they weren't sure which version of their characters they were supposed to be promoting. The final budget was well over $300 million, and it only made $661 million worldwide. And this was a huge disaster for a movie featuring Batman, Superman, The Flash, Aquaman, and Wonder Woman all together. It could easily have been a multi-billion-dollar movie like Avengers Endgame, which was what Warner Brothers had intended. But instead, the movie was universally hated and was so broken that fans spent years demanding the original Snyder Cut, which eventually got released and proved just how different the original vision was. And what's crazy is that when the Snyder Cut finally came out, it was so much better than the theatrical version. It showed that Warner Brothers had basically thrown away a decent movie to make a terrible one. And the studio had literally paid millions of dollars to make their own movie so much worse. Exorcist The Beginning, 2004. Spending millions just to fail, not once, but twice. Then there are some movies that are so cursed that even starting completely over can't save it. Exorcist The Beginning from 2004 was originally directed by Paul Schrader, but the studio hated his psychological horror approach and wanted more traditional scares and gore. But instead of just doing reshoots, they literally threw away Schrader's entire movie and hired Rennie Harlan to start from scratch with the same script and some of the same actors. They built new sets, created new special effects, and made two completely different movies with the same basic story. The original sets were demolished and rebuilt from the ground up, making it one of the most wasteful productions in Hollywood history. Think about that for a second. A studio spent millions making a movie, decided they hated it, then spent millions more just to make the same movie? The final version cost around $80 million to make and brought in just $78 million worldwide. So yeah, that was an undeniable box office flop. Audiences weren't impressed either. It only earned between 10 and 27% on Rotten Tomatoes for both categories. The movie was such a disaster that they eventually released Schrader's original version and called it the Dominion Exorcist prequel. And guess what happened? The budget was $30 million, and the total worldwide gross, $251,000. So yeah, that one flopped even worse than the first one did. Fantastic Four 2015. When the real villain wasn't on screen, it was the person signing the checks. So the Exorcist prequel failed twice, but at least both versions were equally terrible. Fantastic Four 2015 took a different approach. Start with something salvageable, then surgically remove everything that was good about the somewhat decent version of the movie you had just created. Allow me to introduce you to Josh Trank. You see, Trank thought he was making the next great superhero movie when he started directing Fantastic Four in 2014. He wanted to create something dark and serious, like a sci-fi horror film about young people getting terrifying powers they didn't want. But Fox Studios had different ideas. They hated the first cut of the movie, and they impulsively decided to reimagine the whole thing. The studio basically fired Trank from his own movie and brought in new people to reshoot almost everything. But when the reshoots started, well, that's when everything fell apart. The lead actors were already working on other projects, so Fox had to bring them in on weekends and late nights just to throw together some kind of coherent new story. And of course, the result was a complete mess. You could literally see where the original movie ended and the reshoots began, because that's how sharp and drastically the tone changed, which was also a big part of why the movie flopped at the box office. It was made for $120 million, but only earned $168 million worldwide. And the movie scored just 4.3 on IMDb. It was like being castrated, Trank later said about the reshoot nightmare. The final movie was such a mess that it destroyed the Fantastic Four brand. It almost ended Trank's directing career, and Fox gave up on the franchise. And it took Marvel well over a decade to even think about touching those characters again.